Moonfleet. I would not spend it all on my own ends, but put aside a part to build the poor houses again, as men say Blackbeard meant to do with it." I did not know what made him speak like this, and was not willing, even in fancy, to agree to what he counselled, for with that gem before me, lustrous, and all the brighter for lying on a rough deal table, I could only think of the wealth it was to bring to us, and how I would most certainly go back one day to Moonfleet and marry Grace. So I never answered Elzevir, but took the diamond and slipped it back in the silver locket, which still hung round my neck, for that was the safest place for it that we could think of. We spent some days in wandering round the town making inquiries, and learnt that most of the diamond buyers lived near one another in a certain little street, whose name I have forgotten, but that the richest and best known of them was one Christian Aldobrand. He was a Jew by birth, but had lived all his life in the Hague, and besides having bought and sold some of the finest stones, was said to ask few questions, and to trouble little whence stones came, so they were but good. Thus, after much thought and many changes of purpose, we chose this Aldobrand, and settled we would put the matter to the touch with him. We took an evening in late summer for our venture, and came to Aldobrand's house about an hour before sundown. I remember the place well, though I have not seen it for so long, and would certainly never like to see it again. It was a low house of 2 stories, standing back a little from the street, with some wooden palings and a grass plot before it, and a stone-flagged path leading up to the door. The front of it was whitewashed with green shutters, and had a shiny-leaved magnolia trained round about the windows. These jewellers had no shops, though sometimes they set a single necklace or bracelet in a bottom window, but put up notices proclaiming their trade. Thus there was over Aldobrand's door a board stuck out to say that he bought and sold jewels, and would lend money on diamonds or other valuables. A sturdy serving-man opened the door, and when he heard our business was to sell a jewel, left us in a stone-floored hall or lobby, while he went upstairs to ask whether his master would see us. A few minutes later the stairs creaked, and Aldobrand himself came down. He was a little wizened man with yellow skin and deep wrinkles, not less than 70 years old, and I saw he wore shoes of polished leather, silver-buckled and tilted-heeled, to add to his stature. He began to speak to us from the landing, not coming down into the hall, but leaning over the handrail. "Well, my sons, what would you with me? I hear you have a jewel to sell, but you must know I do not purchase sailors' flotsam. So if 'tis a moonstone, or cat's eye, or some pin-headed diamonds, keep them to make brooches for your sweethearts, for Aldobrand buys no toys like that." He had a thin and squeaky voice, and spoke to us in our own tongue, guessing no doubt that we were English from our faces. It was true he handled the language badly enough, yet I was glad he used it, for so I could follow all that was said. "No toys like that," he said again, repeating his last words, and Elzevir answered, "May it please your worship, we are sailors from overseas, and this boy has a diamond that he would sell." I had the gem in my hand already, and when the old man squeaked peevishly, "Out with it then, let's see, let's see," I reached it out to him. He stretched down over the banisters and took it, holding out his palm hollowed, as if it was some little paltry stone that might otherwise fall and be lost. It nettled me to have him thus underrate our treasure, even though he had never seen it, and so I plumped it down into his hand as if it were as big as a pumpkin. Now the hall was a dim place, being lit only by a half-circle of glass over the door, and so I could not see very well. And in reaching down he brought his head near mine, and I could swear his face changed when he felt the size of the stone in his hand, and turned from impatience and contempt to wonder and delight. He took the jewel quickly from his palm and held it up between finger and thumb, and when he spoke again, his voice was changed as well as his face, and had lost most of the sharp impatience. "There is not light enough to see in this dark place. Follow me." And he turned back and went upstairs rapidly, holding the stone in his hand, and we close at his heels, being anxious not to lose sight of him now that he had our diamond, for all he was so rich and well known a man. Thus we came to another landing, and there he flung open the door of a room which looked out west, and had the light of the setting sun streaming in full flood through the window. The change from the dimness of the stairs to this level red blaze was so quick that for a minute I could make out nothing, but turning my back to the window saw presently that the room was panelled all through with painted wood, with a bed let into the wall on one side and shelves round the others, on which were many small coffers and strong boxes of iron. The jeweller was sitting at a table with his face to the sun, holding the diamond up against the light and gazing into it closely, so I could see every working of his face, the hard and cunning look that had come back to it, and he turned suddenly upon me and asked quite sharply, "What is your name, boy? Whence do you come?" Now I was not used to walk under false names, and he took me unawares, so I must needs blurt out, "My name is John Trenchard, sir, and I come from Moonfleet in Dorset." A second later I could have bitten off my tongue for having said as much, and saw Elzevir frowning at me to make me hold my peace. But it was too late then, for the merchant was writing down my answer in a little parchment ledger. And though it would seem to most but a little thing that he should thus take down my name and birthplace, and only vexed us at the time, because we would not have known it at all whence we came, yet in the overrulings of Providence it was ordered that this note in Mr. Aldobrand's book should hereafter change the issue of my life. "From Moonfleet in Dorset," he repeated to himself as he finished writing my answer. "And how did John Trenchard come by this?" And he tapped the diamond as it lay on the table before him. Then Elzevir broke in quickly, fearing no doubt lest I should be betrayed into saying more. "Nay, sir, we are not come to play at questions and answers, but to know whether your worship will buy this diamond, and at what price. We have no time to tell long histories, and so I must only say that we are English sailors, and that the stone is fairly come by." And he let his fingers play with the diamond on the table, as if he feared it might slip away from him. "Softly, softly," said the old man. "All stones are fairly come by, but had you told me whence you got this, I might have spared myself some tedious tests, which now I must crave pardon for making." He opened a cupboard in the panelling, and took out from it a little pair of scales, some crystals, a black stone, and a bottle full of green liquid. Then he sat down again, drew the diamond gently from Elzevir's fingers, which were loath to part with it, and began using his scales, balancing the diamond carefully, now against a crystal, now against some small brass weights. I stood with my back to the sunset, watching the red light fall upon this old man as he weighed the diamond, rubbed it on the blackstone, or let fall on it a drop of the liquor, and so could see the wonder and emotion fade from his face, and only hard craftiness left in it. I watched him meddling till I could bear to watch no longer, feeling a fierce, feverish suspense as to what he might say, and my pulse beating so quick that I could scarce stand still. For was not the decisive moment very nigh when we should know from these parched-up lips the value of the jewel, and whether it was worth risking life for, whether the fabric of our hopes was built on sure foundation or on slippery sand? So I turned my back on the diamond merchant, and looked out of the window, waiting all the while to catch the slightest word that might come from his lips. I have found then, and at other times, that in such moments, though the mind be occupied entirely by one overwhelming thought, yet the eyes take in, as it were unwittingly, all that lies before them, so that we can afterwards recall a face or landscape of which at the time we took no note. Thus it was with me that night, for though I was thinking of nothing but the jewel, yet I noted everything that could be seen through the window, and the recollection was of use to me later on. The window was made in the French style, reaching down to the floor, and opening like a door with two leaves. It led on to a little balcony, and now stood open, for the day was still very hot, and on the wall below was trained a pear-tree, which was half embowered the balcony with its green leaves. The blinds inside and heavy shutters shod with iron on the outer wall, and there were besides strong bolts and sockets, from which ran certain wires, whose use I did not know. Below the balcony was a square garden plot, shut in with a brick wall, and kept very neat and trim. There were hollyhocks round the walls, and many-coloured poppies, with many other shrubs and flowers. My eyes fell on one especially, a tall, red-blossomed, rushy kind of flower that I had never seen before, and that seemed indeed to be something out of the common, for it stood in the middle of a little earth plot,